Hey everybody, it's me again. Happy Friday. I have a question for you. I'm thinking about having a name for this set of videos, but I don't know what you should call me. Should I be just Mrs. Langford, or Auntie Sue the Book Lady, or just the Book Lady, or something else? Think of something cool and have your parents write it in the comments, and I will see what I think is the best one for me. Now, today's book is called McBroom and the Big Wind by Sid Fleshman, illustrated by Kurt Worth. I can't deny it, it does get a mite windy out here on the prairie. Why, just last year, a blow came ripping across the farm and carried off a pail of sweet milk. The next day it came back for the cow. But that wasn't the howling, scowling, almighty big wind I aimed to tell you about. That was just a common little prairie breeze. No account, really, hardly worth bragging about. It was the big wind that broke my leg. I don't expect you to believe that, and yet I'd best start with some smaller weather and work up to that bone breaker. I remember distinctly the first prairie wind that came scampering along after we bought our wonderful 1-acre farm. My, that land is rich, the best topsoil in the country. There wasn't a thing that won't grow in our rich topsoil, and fast as lightning. The morning I'm talking about, our oldest boys were helping me shingle the roof. We had bought a keg of nails, but it turned out that those nails were a whit short. We buried them in the ground in that wonderful topsoil and watered them down. In 5 or 10 minutes, those nails grew a full ½ inch. So there we were up on the roof, hammering down the shingles. There wasn't a cloud in the sky at first. The younger boys were shooting marbles all over the farm, and the girls were jumping rope. When I had just pounded down the last shingle, I said to myself, Josh McBroom, that's a mighty stout roof. It'll last 100 years. Just then, I felt a small draft on the back of my neck. And a moment later, one of the girls, it was Polly as I recall, shouted up to me. Pa, she said, do jackrabbits have wings? I laughed. No, Polly. Then how come there's a flock of jackrabbits flying over the house? I looked up. Mercy! Rabbits were flapping their ears across the sky in a perfect V formation, northbound. I knew then that we were in for a slight blow. Run, everybody! I shouted to the youngins. I didn't want the wind picking 'em up by their ears. Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tommy, Mary, Larry, and little Clarinda, in the house, scamper! The clothesline was already beginning to whip around like a jump rope. My dear wife, Melissa, who had been baking a heap of biscuits, threw open the door, and in we dashed, and not a moment too soon. The wind was snapping at our heels like a pack of wolves. It aimed to barge right in and make itself at home. A prairie wind has no manners at all. Now we slammed the door in its teeth. Now the wind didn't take that politely. It rammed and battered the door all the while. All of us pushed and shoved to hold the door shut. My, it was a battle. How the house creaked and trembled. Push, my lambs, I yelled. Shove. At times, the door planks bent like barrel staves, but we held that roaring wind out. And when I saw there was no getting past us, the zephyr sneaked around the house to the back door. Howsomever, our oldest boy, Will, was too smart for it. He piled Mama's heap of fresh biscuits against the back door. And my dear wife, Melissa, is a wonderful cook, but her biscuits are terrible heavy. They made it a splendid doorstop. But what worried me the most was our wondrous rich topsoil. That thieving wind was apt to make off with it, leaving us with a trifling hole in the ground. "Shove, my lambs," I said. "Push." The battle raged on for an hour. Finally, the wind gave up, butting its fool head against the door. With a great angry sigh, it turned and whisked itself away, scattering fence pickets as it went. We all took a deep breath, and I opened the door a crack. Hardly a leaf now stirred the ground. A bird began to twitter, and I rushed outside to our poor 1-acre farm. Mercy! Why, I saw left me pop-eyed. "Melissa!" I shouted with glee. "Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tommy, Mary, Larry, and little Clarinda, come here, my lambs, and look." We all gazed in wonder. Our topsoil was still there, every bit. Bless those youngsters, the boys had left their marbles all over the field, and the marbles had grown as large as boulders. There they sat, huge agates and sparkling glassies, holding down our precious topsoil. But that rambunctious wind didn't leave empty-handed. It ripped off our new shingle roof, pulled out the nails too. We found out later that the wind had shingled every gopher hole in the next county. Now that was a strong draft, but it wasn't the big wind. Nothing like the kind that broke my leg. Still, a prairie gust was an education to me. "Young'uns," I said after we'd rolled those giant marbles downhill, "the next uninvited breeze that comes along, we'll be ready for it. There are two sides to every flapjack. It appears to me that the wind can be downright useful on our farm if we let it know who's boss." The next gusty day that came along, we put it to work for us. I made a wind plow. I rigged a bed sheet and tackle from our old farm plow, and as soon as the breeze sprung up, I'd go tackling to and fro over the farm, plowing it as I went. Our son Chester once plowed the entire farm in under 3 minutes. On Thanksgiving morning, Mama told the girls to pluck a large turkey for dinner. They didn't so much like that chore, but a prairie gust arrived just in time. The girls stuck the turkey out the window, and the wind plucked that turkey clean, pin feathers and all. Oh, we got downright glad to see a blow coming along. The young'uns were always wanting to go out and play in the wind, but Mama was afraid they'd be carried off. So I made them wind shoes. I made them out of heavy iron skillets. Out in the breeze, those shoes felt as light as feathers. The girls would jump rope with clothesline, and the wind spun the rope, of course. Many a time I saw the youngsters put on their wind shoes and go clumping outside with a big tin funnel, all the empty bottles and jugs that they could round up. They'd cork the containers jam full of prairie wind. Then come summer, when there wasn't a breath of air, they'd uncork a bottle or two of fresh winter wind and enjoy the cool breeze. Of course, we had to windproof the farm every fall. We'd plant a field of buttercups, and my, they were slippery, all that butter, I guess. The wind would slip and slide over the farm without being able to get purchase on the topsoil. By then, the boys and I had re-shingled the roof. We used screws instead of nails. Mercy, then came the big wind. It started out gentle enough. There were a few jackrabbits and some crows flying backwards through the air, but nothing out of the ordinary. Of course, the girls went outside to jump the clothesline, and the boys got busy laying up their bottles of wind for summer. Mama had just baked a batch of fresh biscuits. My, did they smell good! I ate a dozen or so hot out of the oven, and that turned out to be a terrible mistake. Outside, the wind was picking up ground speed and scattering the fence posts as it went. Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Clarinda, I shouted. Inside, my lambs. That wind is getting ornery. The young'uns came trooping in and pulled off their wind shoes. Not a moment too soon. The clothesline began to whip around so fast it seemed to disappear. Then we saw a hen house come flying through the air, the hens still in it. The sky was turning dark and mean, and the wind came out of the far north, howling and shrieking and shaking the house. In the cupboard, cups chattered in their saucers. Soon we noticed big balls of fur rolling along the prairie like tumbleweeds. Turned out that they were timber wolves from up north. And then an old hollow log came spinning across the farm and split against my chopping stump. Out of it rolled a black bear, and he was in a temper. He had been trying to hibernate and didn't take kindly to being awakened. He gave out a roar and looked around for somebody to chase. He saw us at the windows and decided we would do. The mere sight of him scared the young'uns, and they huddled together, holding hands near the fireplace. I got down my shotgun and opened the window, and that was a mistake. Two things happened at once. The bear was coming on, and in my haste I forgot to calculate the direction of the wind. It came shrieking along the side of the house, and when I poked the gun barrel out the window, well, the wind bent it like an angle iron. That buckshot flew due south. I found out later it brought down a brace of ducks over Mexico. But worse than that, when I threw open the window, such a draft came in that our young'uns were sucked up through the chimney, holding hands, and they were carried away like a string of sausages. Mama near fainted away. "My dear Melissa," I exclaimed, "don't you worry. I'll get your young'uns back." I fetched a rope and rushed outside. I could see the young'uns up in the sky blowing south. I could also see the bear, and he could see me. He gave a growl with a mouthful of teeth like rusty nails, and he rose up on his hind legs and came towards me with his eyes glowing red as fire. I didn't fancy tangling with that monster, and I dodged around behind the clothesline and kept one eye on the bear and the other on the young'uns. They were now flying over the county seat and hardly looked bigger than mayflies. The bear charged towards me. The wind was spinning the clothesline so fast that he couldn't see it, and he charged right smack into it. My, didn't he begin to jump. He jumped red hot pepper, only faster. He had got himself trapped inside the rope and couldn't jump out. Well, of course, I didn't lose a moment. I began flapping my arms like a bird. That was an enormous big wind. I figured I could fly after the young'uns. The wind tugged and pulled at me, but it couldn't lift me an inch off the ground. Tarnation! I had eaten too many biscuits. They were heavy as lead and weighed me down. The young'uns were almost out of sight, and I rushed to the barn for the wind plow. Once out in the breeze, the bed sheet filled with wind. Off I shot like a cannonball, plowing a deep furrow as I went. I didn't streak along, though. I was making better time than the young'uns. I kept my hands on the plow and the handles and steered around barns and farmhouses. I saw a haystack explode in the wind. If that wind got any stronger, it wouldn't surprise me to see the sun blown off course. It would set in the south at high noon. I plowed right along and gained rapidly on the young'uns. They were still holding hands and just clearing the treetops. Before long, I was within hailing distance. "Be brave, my lambs," I shouted. "Hold tight." I spurted after them until their shadows lay across my path, but the bed sheet was so swelled out with the wind that I couldn't stop the plow. Before I could let go of the handles and jumped off, I had sailed far ahead of the young'uns. I heaved the rope into the air. "Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tommy, Mary, Larry, and little Clarinda," I shouted as they came flying overhead. "Hang on!" Hester missed the rope, and Jill missed the rope, and so did Peter. but Will caught it, and I had to dig my heels into the earth to hold him. Then I started back. The young'uns were too light for the wind. They hung in the air. I had to drag 'em home on a rope like balloons on a string. Of course, it took most of the day to shoulder my way back through that wind. It was a mighty struggle. I tell you, it was nearly supper time before we saw the farmhouse ahead, and that black bear was still jumping rope. I dragged the young'uns into the house, the rascals. They had a jolly time flying through the air and wanted to do it again. Mama put them to bed with their wind shoes on. The wind blew all night, and the next morning that bear was still a jumping rope. His tongue was hanging out, and he'd lost so much weight he was skin and bones. Finally, about mid-morning, the wind got tired of blowing one way, and it blew the other. We got to feeling sorry for the bear, and we cut him loose. He was so tuckered out he didn't even growl. He just pointed himself towards the tall timber to find another hollow log to crawl into. But he had lost the fine art of walking. We watched him jump and jump north until he was out of sight. That was the howlin', scowlin', almighty big wind that broke my leg. It had not only pulled up the fence post, but the holes as well. It dropped one of those holes right outside the barn door, and I stepped in it. And that's the truth. Everyone on the prairie knows Josh McBroom would rather break his leg than tell a fib. The end. How did you like that story? Do you think everything happened just like he said? Tell me in the comments. Bye.